Well, here we are again, lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Carell, and I have with me two of my favorite people on the planet, Miss Lisa Sheehan and also Jan Jeremias. And we are doing this. It's gotten to be quite a habit over the last couple of years, but we get together once a week to just share thoughts on different subjects and see how we can take language and words and turn them into tools of empowerment. And sometimes it works really, really well. Sometimes it only works well, but it always seems to work somehow. So here we are, and I just want to acknowledge that our buddy Ken Caputo is busy making the world a better place with some folks out there, and he'll probably be back with us next week. So in the meantime, what do we want to talk about today? I have a few thoughts that are on my mind right at the moment. The first one is, the whole notion of our lives being an exquisite journey, that there's an inherent neatness or coolness or wonderfulness to being alive. And I hope that everyone has the opportunity from time to time to sit back and kind of enjoy and think about that. The other thing is that we were talking about a real interesting book. If you would like, Jan, you can say the title again. I know Lisa knows it by heart.
And I don't. So
Good. This is how we learn.
this is how we learn. So the book is called Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, and Lao Tzu, The Parallel Sayings by Richard Hooper.
So along the way, I started life out in engineering school, and engineering school has fundamentals, just like any discipline does. In basketball, you learn how to pass, dribble, and shoot, right? In football, you learn how to punt, pass, and kick, run, throw, and block. All those, there's fundamentals, right? And so those are called the design principles. And being human has design principles as well. And it just seems like reading something like that and seeing the connection. Although the words are not exactly the same, there's a fundamental human condition that people who are up to something good, no matter what language they speak, no matter what time they're in, are going to come up with some of the same ideas. And I think that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. I was looking at the some of the quotes throughout the book and just the parallelism, no matter the background between peoples that were from different areas of the world, people who were on different continents, and
Yes.
how basically they were trying to deliver the same message.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. I will tell you, I am the first one to turn myself in and say, I don't have an original thought in my head. Every single thing you ever hear me say was put there by somebody else, or at least a sentence that led up to what I'm saying is someplace else. And the notion that an idea can be copyrighted to me is absurd. I don't know where that came from or who thinks that's a good idea or whether or not there's a reasonableness test for somebody being able to say somebody else's words and then take credit for it. When you're speaking, you own the words you say, right?
Right.
So if it happens to belong to somebody else, there could be as many out of 7 billion. It's likely that a lot of people are saying some of the same things at close to the same time. And if that's the case, that tells me that there's some really, really cool parallels in the human condition and possibly in the way that people grow and develop and what they get interested in as they do.
I find it interesting too because I just started a class called Philosophy Works, and I realized that's that's one of the things I adore about people in general and philosophers, how they've always found the undercurrent of humanity despite the times that were happening, and that's throughout history of
Yeah.
mankind. And so it's kind of I'm deeply and that goes along with your sayings too. Like every spiritual concept is still boils down to the same philosophies, shall we say, which is, love one another, basically. All the rest is just commentary.
Yeah.
That's right, exactly. It's just love. And I think what I also value in the book is the fact that when they look at different quotes, I love the fact that they're phrased differently in some form or another, because I think one might speak to me and another might speak to you, Bill, but they're giving the same message. And sometimes not only is how something's said, so maybe it's something like just a different word, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get that. Where someone else might have said it in a different way and you might not have gotten the gist of it. And then the the other thing is that just the fact to me that they're speaking of the same things, the same gists, unites people because we realize we're all really trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all leaders. 100%. There's no distinction between them and leaders. Their name equals leaders. Okay. And what do leaders do? Well, it's all, coming from the same very important and positive place of both educating and edifying people through their actions and their words. And I love what you're saying because this is why we have a podcast, because the nuance of a single word that can dramatically change both what's being said and what's being heard to a point where there's an opportunity to have a knowledge breakthrough. And the knowledge breakthrough comes usually with some sort of physical sensation. You're going to get goosebumps. You're going to get, feeling in the pit of your stomach. There will be like this felt sense that comes along with having been changed forever. You can't go back to what you were before you knew that and had that change. And the more often, in my opinion, that human beings can do that, like right now, I'm just sitting here engulfed in goosebumps for a moment. And I think to me, that's the epitome of being alive on the edge of self expression and joy, not like a formula or not like a set of steps that you go through, but to constantly be at that edge where you're just so excited about what comes next. That make any sense?
Yeah. And right now I'm doing a mentorship program with two coaches. And what I'm finding also so interesting is sometimes it's not only the way things are said, it has everything to do with where you are in your life at that moment.
Yes.
And so some of what they're telling me, I'm sure is not new to
Yeah.
me even. It's just that at other points in my life, I might not have been ready to hear it. And so all of a sudden, when they're saying it now, I get it. Like something has shifted. And
Yep.
so therefore, I really get it. And I wouldn't say it's a knowledge thing. I was going to correct you, Will, and say it's more like you get the wisdom of it. Because to me, wisdom is that feeling, is that all sensory input of an idea or a thought. Knowledge is what I learn in a book. So I look at wisdom as that wisdom expression that I get.
It has an associated experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
And where knowledge, one of my favorite people to quote is Werner Erhard, and what he basically said is people are basically not listening, even though they try with all their might. And it's on average, you have to repeat something to another person 7 times before they'll understand. And the knowledge comes in the first two, three, four, five, and six. The experience and the wisdom that you're talking about, like owning it in your body from now on, that's exactly where that transformation takes place. And the understanding, everything else, knowing is a booby prize, really. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, yeah, so you can parrot something back now that like singing a Japanese song that you have no idea what the words are, but Tokyo Shoeshine Boy or whatever. A long story short, when you actually can feel it yourself, then you get to be in that role of leadership where you can nuance the language to the next folks. And you can say the same thing in other words, and you can say the same thing in other words. until those other words finally hit that little spot on the dial where I get it.
That's so true. I mean, I that's what I think is like mine is you get goosebumps. Like I'll tear up if something hits me to the core,
Oh yeah.
and that happens more and more lately. So, and then I think that's how you, like you say, it's a visceral feeling. Both of you mentioned like a physical aspect to it. It's part of it that kind of anchors it into you. And then, like you said, Bill, and then you could mix it up in your own verbiage and spit it back out again so that people can understand it, which I think is the fun aspect of knowledge that becomes wisdom, that becomes sharing. And you discover your own wisdom, your own truth, and that you can't shake. And when in our class we were just talking about, what do you consider a wise person, attributes of a wise person, and they showed pictures of like Mother Teresa and all these other people, and then we could include the people in the book, and and even people that are spiritual wonders or whatever you want to call them, but you could ask them any question and you can't shake them because their core is so strong in their beliefs that you just can't shake them. And I mean, that's kind of like what the point I'd like to get to. At least, if I have some core beliefs that are so strong that I can come from that part of me whenever I'm addressing any questions that people are coming to me with, whether it's major or minor or anything.
It's interesting. While you're talking, I've just got all these things firing, and the concern that people who think that wisdom lives somewhere else is that they'll get it wrong, and they don't risk. Wise people have two really powerful attributes in my opinion, and the first one is that they know that wisdom lives in the listener's ears. The wisdom is already there, and all they do is awaken it. And the other thing is that a person who is fully satisfied with who they are is fully open to be have their mind changed. There's nothing to protect. There's absolutely nothing to defend. And so therefore, anybody who's got a great idea, go ahead and bring it and let's kind of like have some fun with it, right? And I also think that the what you expressed, Lisa, in terms of having some concern about, you know, being rock solid with who you are. We're in an environment right now where there are a lot of people who are basically milking, keeping people off guard and keeping people, a little bit, off balance. And they're doing that with a fundamental thing called changing language. What you thought you knew at the beginning of somebody's speech, by the end of the speech, they now have corrected what your knowledge is so many times and told you don't understand what the word means today. And that's not about giving anybody any education or edifying. It's about exerting control, coercion, and using what I consider to be a horrible tactic. And sometimes it's just plain called gaslighting. Okay, and it's going to be short lived because people are too smart. They're not going to put up with it for very long. And how they'll vote is they will not argue, they'll just walk away. Don't have to put myself near that. We'll change the channel, we'll tune into some other part of our life, and those folks can have a lot of fun talking to each other. So, the exquisite journey. And I think those four human beings, I don't even know how realistic a view we have other than the words that have been quoted from them, which mostly did not get written down in any of their lifetimes. These were traditions that were handed orally, from generation to generation for many or most of them. And so, with that in mind, it's more likely that our experience of what we're hearing is the experience of what someone who heard something and then finally wrote it down. Does that make sense? And
And
if
wrote
they're
their interpretation of it. Yeah.
which is what we do, right? We don't have a
Right.
choice.
Right.
It's neither good nor bad, it just is, which is why it's cool to come from a questioning environment instead of being quite sure that the other person isn't saying it correctly. And that's why, you know, uh, when I think about the great leaps forward, have you both had these periods of time where you grew like a weed spiritually and mentally and intellectually to the point where it almost was too much and overwhelming, but it was a good thing? And I got to sleep for a little bit and get back at it in 3 or 4 hours because it's just too cool, to spend any time away from. To me, if people are challenged to really take responsibility for their own growth and development, can you imagine what that would be like if people just went around demanding from all of the wise elders, "No, give me more. I want more now," you know? "You keep speaking, I'll keep questioning." And isn't that how the traditions of wisdom get passed on? Is the experience of one person through language gets transferred to another person until that experience is lived and felt by the person who's receiving. But the person who's sending isn't necessarily just sending, they are creating that together. Does that make sense?
We're all constantly co-creating.
That's what communication is, right?
One of the ways. Yeah.
Well, yeah, machines do it in a kind of an odd way. It's totally, I'm saying this. I'm going to send you a message that says something, so get ready to get my message. And then the receiving piece of electronics says back, "Okay, I'm ready to receive your message." And so the first machine says "I," and the second machine said, "Did you send it yet?" And the first machine said, "Yes, I did." "Did you receive it?" "Yes, I just received I." And it goes back like millions of times a second until the whole sentence "I love you" gets transferred over to the receiving side. But every bit is, it's important to have exactly what is being sent numerically be received on the other end to be the same numeric value. And that's how machines do it. People are a little more sloppy than that for the most part. So if somebody around you says "I love you," what do they actually mean?
That's always a question to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Do you ever do you ever think to ask, what do you mean by that?
I've asked that.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I've asked that
how'd that
because,
go?
well, depends on the situation, but I think that when sometimes they have a particular um, objective in mind. So when they say I love you, not to be, because I say I love you all the time and it's coming from a genuine place, but it's like, is there some sort of ulterior motive that serves them more than it serves the person who's on the receiving end? And that's not the way I like to live, but it's very easy to say, okay, well, how am I going to, how do I receive this as the person? How do I receive this? And do I just receive it and not worry about what anybody else's motive is?
Sure.
And do I just take in the love, for example?
There's so many ways to say that statement. It could be super casual or I mean, love ya, there's no oomph behind it, so to speak. I
Or
mean, I
or
think I've mentioned it before. I have a hard it's not a phrase I use a lot. If I'm using it more as I get older now, but I didn't say it unless I literally meant it. I mean, it would not cross my lips. So there's very few people that have received those three precious words from me.
I'm one of them.
Yes.
And it's remarkable because, technology informs me a lot, and I I used to, like, be real stingy with my hearts on Facebook. You could used to be all you could do was give it a thumbs up. That was the only selection. That when that was it, it was really hard to get it wrong. And then they came up with an emoji for care and a heart, and angry face and sad face and all that kind of stuff. I just heart everything. I found out two things. Number one is that I don't have a certain amount of love in me and then it's gone and used up.
No.
It's like a renewable resource, like a hug. And I'm going to share something with you. I went to a 50th year reunion for high school on Saturday night. And you can consider that many of the folks I had seen many times over the last 50 years, some of them I have not seen since we graduated from high school in caps and gowns. So I just made it, no matter who I ran into all night long, I would walk up and I would give them an embrace
Oh, gosh.
gesture. And 100% of the people that I did that with hugged me back. And then the next thing I knew, as I started looking around the room, when I first got there, nobody was hugging each other. By the time I got finished hugging 5, 6, 7 people, now I'm looking around the room again. And people that I hadn't even said hello, I noticed that they're all hugging other classmates. And it just made me feel like if you're going to be an instigator and a leader, why not do something that costs people nothing? It really costs you being generous with your own self and being willing to potentially be rejected. And if you are rejected, there are good reasons for it from time to time, health reasons, COVID, all the rest of that sort of thing. We went 2 years without having human being feeling touch with our familiars. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so it's kind of a neat thing for me when I say I love you to people. And this is a true story. They asked me to come up and share some experiences in high school at the microphone. And so at the end of it, I was talking about how close I felt and how much better I know so many people in the room. There were about 60 or 70 people, including spouses. And so I started to single people out and I said, Linda, I love you. I never knew you in high school. You are now one of the most important people to me on the planet. And immediately before I finished, I love you too, Bill Carell. And then I said, Dottie Ravino, you know what? I love you. I love you too, Bill Carell. And so this is something that a consistent behavior with my friends, my family, and even guys that play golf with. The first gesture is an embrace and allowing somebody into that totally psychologically protected 3-foot area that's supposed to be your space. When you're generous with your space and you're generous with your heart, I think the world gets it. I really do.
But I think there are other ways to communicate that. Especially when you are face to face. About a week ago, I went out with two close friends. My One of my closest friends was 80, and we were taking her out for her birthday.
Yeah.
And right away when we got there, and I've spoken to her, and I've been on Zoom with her, and I've maybe seen her at a distance, maybe once or twice in the last few years. But she said to me, "I'm not hugging," and I was like, "Okay, it's cool." But you know, not even as the day went on, the love was still there, and it was just so apparent.
Yes.
And as we chatted and our other friend and everything, we didn't need that physical. Yes, would I have liked to have given her a hug? Yeah, but it wasn't necessary for how much, for the feeling to be transferred from one to the other or vice versa.
So can you share just a little bit with how you replaced an embrace so that there actually was a feeling of exchanged love?
I think it
I
was,
think it's important. I agree with what you're saying. It's not just one size fits all.
I mean, it was eye contact.
Yeah.
It was like real eye contact. It was smiles. Both of us were really excited to see each other, so you could tell we both got teary.
Yeah.
And the tone of voice and the reminiscing and the stories we shared throughout. We were together for the afternoon and for the evening. for part of the evening, and the stories we shared, and just and her response back with what she shared verbally, like, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how much this has meant to me. And and the texts afterwards, after thanking us and everything, it was just like the whole afternoon, and it was just like a love fest without necessarily that physical embrace. And so it was just beautiful, but I think a lot of it was facial expression, eye contact, which is why when COVID was around and everybody was wearing masks, it was very hard because not only didn't you touch people, but you couldn't read their expression necessarily.
Yeah.
I think
Lisa,
genuine listening adds to that too. I mean, we all learn how to listen. I mean, you could tell when somebody's really listening to you, and especially if you're one on one, like you were saying, or in a small group, and you can't share physically, you can't touch physically. That, and you have that bond is when you listen to each other intently and respond properly. You know.
do you know who I've gotten the most training out of for that non-embrace kind of exchange of love? Small children and dogs. You know, they're the communication that goes on, with the, moving around and wagging and all the rest of that sort of stuff, and getting on the same wavelength as a 2-year old or a 3-year old, and they can spot a both of them can spot a phony a mile away. You ain't getting away with any wooden nickels there, that's for sure. And that's where I really spent a lot of time learning to speak baby and fluent dog, with the gestures and not necessarily, with the speaking.
Right. They're so physically expressive, both.
Yes.
I have a photo that I took. I took a selfie actually, and I've learned uh, that if I ever want to get like a selfie with Tonka, my dog, the best way to do it is if I hold him, because otherwise, then I can set the camera up on timer, and then I can actually get him in the right position. So I have this photo of me. He's looking straight at my face, and I'm looking straight at his face with this mutual expression of love. Like, it's just, you can tell in his eyes the way he's looking at me, and it's really usually pretty obvious when people see me with him about how much I love him. And animals are truly expressive in love with their whole bodies.
It was just a picture like that, but it was a groom with his best man who was his dog, and the
Yeah.
dog had on the front of the tuxedo with the tie, and the dog is just looking up at him, and he's looking down at the dog, and he's bent down to fix his tie, kind of thing, and it was so pure. It wasn't even you didn't question what that look was in either of their eyes.
Similar. I had a photo that I came across, and was this, I don't know if it was a couple or someone holding a baby, and it was beautiful, like kind of it was a newborn kind of in the crux of their arm, and just holding it and looking directly in, and that there was that element of real love that didn't, that was just so pure.
Yeah. Yeah. Over the years, there's been a lot of change in what the word love means to me. And, I think mostly when I was growing up, what I saw expressed in other people, including my parents, was love was for them claiming and possessing, you know? It was having rights to something. It was not necessarily an expression of anything more than an unlanguageable feeling that they had for each other, and then they would be miserable to each other. It was so strange. And along the way, I had a friend, and actually she taught me this. She said, "You know what I love you means?" And I said, "I think I do, but what do you got?" And she said, "I love you means I love the way that I feel about myself when I think about you." You know? Thinking about you instantly transforms me into my best possible self. And I love that. And I can't wait for more. I always thought that that was kind of a neat way to look at it.
Hmm. But I think it's in that it's yes, it is, but it's to me, in addition, like for me, that's great. But it's also there is that feeling that you get, it, the feeling which I feel in my heart. I do feel it, and you just feel love toward a person, um, a thing meaning nature, for example, where I think you do feel that.
It's interesting because I respect the experience that you have and the right you have to say that. And I wonder, if for some young people, like, they say the average person will get married either 3 or 4 times in their lifetime this year. And I'm sure they were absolutely dead sure that they were in love, right? I mean, was it in lust? Was it infatuation? Did they have gas? I mean, what could it have been that they had this such strong feeling that it was undeniable? And then as time went on, the communication or whatever broke down to the point where they just couldn't live with each other anymore.
I've always asked that question of not directly, maybe sometimes to divorced couples.
Yeah.
What was it that you loved about him before? But it's not there now, and you can barely ever get a real answer because people don't think of that when they're leaving.
Oh,
It's not even a thought. It's just that I don't, we just can't do it anymore and bye bye. And that's the one thing, with blood being like one of those unconditional love elements, you see people that break up and they never speak again if there's no children involved. It's just like that person never existed. And I find that kind of unbelievable. I mean, we've all had that experience of having, girlfriends or boyfriends throughout our lives that, just disappear for one reason or another. I mean, just because there's no certificate between you doesn't mean you didn't have a relationship. So, and then it's gone and then you never see that person again for the rest of your life. So, yeah, what happened to that love?
I mean, having maybe that love doesn't go away. And so, first of all, I think that when you look at a relationship and you look at love, people change. And so, I think sometimes it's hard to firsthand experience. Sometimes you look back on a relationship, and that's what I did. And in my circumstances, and I loved what it was, but that wasn't applicable now. So, what it had been, or my perception of it, was what I loved. But as time went on and that perception was gone, then I'm not saying I didn't love him, but it was different. And then the second thing is that when a relationship ends, I don't know if it's necessarily a lack of love or the loss or the pain that people can't come to terms with. It's the fact that that love is still there. And for that reason, that disconnect or the fact that somebody said that they no longer love you, even if you love them, is too painful to be in that direct. It's too painful to sit in that space for too long a period of time.
Could be all the above.
That's
Every
right.
relationship has a different. I mean, I know there's people that I wouldn't even be able to recall a name. You know what I mean? Never mind if there's still any feelings there for them.
Right.
But there's yeah, to fall in love with the idea of something is definitely something you see people do all the time. I have a friend that keeps insert man here, you know, make him live up to this ideal role, and then man pops out again because he's not fitting into that square, that round hole that she's created kind of thing. And it's kind of like sad to watch because unless they fit these requirements that she's built up in her little book that's in her head of, this is what you do if you're a boyfriend and this is the course that it should follow. And
Well,
It can
see,
never be that way. Life just isn't that way.
yeah, and what's interesting is while you're both talking, I'm getting an image of two people walking around the world, acting like everyone that they meet is a slot machine, right? And they're pulling the lever on each person. And if they get that feeling, whatever that feeling is, the one that they've labeled as how love's supposed to feel, it's like winning a jackpot, right? And so they'll go back for more of that, and that keep going and keep going. And jackpots don't come that often. So there's this whole huge thing about deciding to love somebody
Mhm.
and not just having it associated with some sort of a feeling. The feeling is cool, and that's okay. However, there are long periods of time, especially when you have to care for somebody who's really ill, that feeling gets replaced with something else, which is a sense of duty and a sense of responsibility. And those are all components of loving somebody, not just being in it for the goodies and the good feelings. But I do believe the reason that we have divorce rates as high as they are is it's far too easy to get married and far too hard to fall in love with someone. They're not willing to put the work in. And I'm not talking about somebody who got into a relationship and there was some kind of dramatic change personality wise or injury wise or just, the taste. But when somebody says the feeling just isn't there anymore, you know, and that's all they had to base the relationship on in the first place, I say shame on you. You deserve better than just the feeling. You deserve 100% fully functioning relationship with another person that can give you back exactly what you're sending. And it may or may not have a feeling associated with it. That's not the litmus test for whether or not you love somebody. I mean, I've watched people care for sick elderly people, and as you were talking about earlier, Jan, with no words being expressed, just the way that they would wipe off somebody's forehead and brow and then ask them if they want anything else and then just don't go away while the person is swearing at them and telling them what a horrible human being that they are. That to me, that is that agape, that is that unconditional, that I love you, you don't get a vote on. And and it's just really moving to me to be in the presence of that. And I can't share with you anything other than some really old memories about girls that I dated before I met Janet, but that's going back almost 50 years ago. So I have to dig deep there. I can share with you adult um, partnerships in business and having friends that were really good friends for a while and then something changed. There was a lot of love associated with those situations as well. And never really an opportunity to say, so what's not working? And have them be able to come up with a real answer, something that's other than it just doesn't feel right. So I'm wondering if human beings need to have a little bit more of a primer or primer, depending on who you had as your first teacher. To what is there something that people can be taught to look further to? How is it that some people are lifelong mates and like animals? Some animals are lifelong mates and some have harems. And what's up with that?
I That's one of the questions of life, right? Is because I've seen couples too that I admire their relationship, and I'm going, what was the first thing that attracted them to each other, and how do they still see it in each other? Because you can see it, like we were talking about, non physically expressive admiration. You could just see it in them. Um, if there's a primer, I don't, because I'm sure we've all seen too many families that speak to each other horribly.
Yes.
and then carry that out into the world that way. And you don't know, and it's as much habit as anything else. They don't even know it's wrong, but maybe a primer in mutual respect for people.
Yeah.
And this is not how we talk to people, kind of thing. Like you teach a toddler. We do not talk to people this way.
Right. And that some things are sometimes better left unsaid.
Often.
Often, right. And I'm having that experience. I'm here with my folks and love them dearly and almost said something, love them. I mean, very close, but almost said something. I was going to say something the other day and thought to myself, what purpose would it say to, what purpose would there be for me to say that?
Hmm.
Was I right? Yes. Was whatever they did kind of dangerous? Yes. But me saying something afterwards doesn't really serve a purpose right now.
Well, I think
It's
you
okay.
said that phrase. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary?
Yeah,
You know,
that's basically what I was going through in my brain. I
yeah.
thought to myself, like, I could say something right now, and part of me would love to say it because I want them to be safe and to live forever and whatnot. But I was like, it's going to serve no purpose for for me to say this right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes like it's not an easy thing to do sometimes because you feel like, oh, I just want to say that. Sometimes, you're better off just like walking out for 5 seconds, taking a deep breath, and then coming back in. And it reminds me of when I used to crate Tonka a lot. When I left, I would put him in dog crate, which I think dog crates are great. And I remember my friend saying to me, never put him in a crate when you're angry. Like you can wait 5 seconds, take a deep breath, and then put him in the crate. But don't let him associate crates being
Yeah.
punishment. And I remember the day I came home and he had chewed through a wall, literally.
Oh my
And I
goodness.
was like, you have toys, you have bones, like why a wall? I'm sitting there and I'm like, and I called my friend and she said, go outside, sit on the porch for 5 seconds, take a few deep breaths, then go inside, then put them in the crate. Because I knew it was just like, oh my gosh, a wall, literally.
Yeah.
So
I can't use chew my slippers like normal dogs.
like normal dogs, right? And so it's that feeling of having enough restraint and really looking at is what I'm going to say in this relationship going to serve the other person. And it's really not about, yes, and you have to serve yourself, but most of the time, if you think about the other person and how they're going to feel, it's going to interpret whether it's important enough for you to say it.
Yeah, and always check in. I mean, ask. There's really nothing wrong. I mean, I learn things the hard way sometimes. And I'll set the Wayback Machine. After I started my business, it was on its butt for the first 2 3 years. 1994, we finally get a head of steam. We got a little bit of money. I go and I buy Jan a 1 year old Volvo station wagon, red, and delivered it up. Well, bought it at Gengris. It was used actually by the owner's wife for 1 year. And so they got me a big red bow, and she was up in Founders Plaza, and all the people with their nose pressed against the glass. We delivered this car to the sidewalk so that they could all wave, and she came down and got the car, and it was a big surprise. So that was cool. I really enjoyed that, how that worked out. Well, fast forward about 3.5 years later, and I do the same thing, but I traded her red Volvo in for a brand new, shiny, never been driven before, all-wheel drive a V70R, and beautiful car, and didn't deliver it, but she cried and she said, "I loved that car. That car was perfect. That car had scratches on it. I mean, we took our dog to the vet in that car, and on it went. And I go, so then we went shopping for a grandfather's clock, right? She always wanted to have a grandfather's clock. And so the grandfather clock that I was looking at was going to be this big monster of, with all the glass and brass and all this kind of stuff. So we went over to the Hitchcock, uh, store, and we walked around. And she goes over, and there's this beautiful little simple, uh, just casework wood clock. It didn't have the Westminster chimes or anything. And she said, I think I like that one. So I salted that away. I bought her that clock for the following Christmas, and when she got it, she cried.
Mhm.
So what I'm saying to you is that what seems like it might be you're sending a really great thing from this side, it may not land with the same amount of enthusiasm as it is sent. And I've tried to learn from that. Now I'm not 100% up on it, which is why I usually like to ask questions.
Hmm. I love giving gifts.
Yeah.
It's one of
Me too.
it's one of my favorite things to do, and really trying to go out and literally like embody whether I think they're going to love it.
Yeah.
I've never been a big gift card person because it seems too impersonal. I'm like, it doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't yeah. And so it's always been, what do I think this person is going to find meaningful, and what are they like? How are they going to feel upon receiving it?
I have a section where I keep gifts that I find for people throughout the year
Hmm.
for the next occasion coming up, and one thing I don't like is when the occasion comes up and I don't have a gift for them, because I need, like I need to have something that I know is connecting with them, and I can't just go out and buy a gift. It doesn't work.
I feel the same way. I've gone out a few times and or had occasions pass, and it was because I was looking but didn't find that gift that I want, that like I felt was right.
Hmm.
So I feel funny, and then I'm like, but I just couldn't find the right one.
I usually ask them what they want and then go get it. But I usually give it enough time so they forget. It's like one of the things that is I've really it is definitely a habit. But for any special occasion, for my dad and his wife, I send them the edible arrangements, chocolate dipped strawberries.
Yep.
They absolutely love them. And this is, we're they're finally up here from Florida, and uh, the first time that I saw them, I went and got a half dozen chocolate dipped strawberries, and I brought them in, and my dad, who's my, his memory is failing, and Marianne, whose memory is failing, and they go, oh yeah, we love those strawberries. Bill, where did we get those strawberries from for your birthday? And I said, I might know how you got those. Moving on now. Not important that you remember. Did you enjoy them? Oh, yes, I enjoyed them a lot. But the being a gracious gift receiver was never easy for me. And I don't know. I mean, I can't point to anything or anything that happened in particular, but it always seemed like it was my responsibility to be the magnanimous creator of an instance where somebody gets pleasure out of receiving a gift. And I've gotten to the point now where I have transformed that, because I saw it as a real gaping hole in my personality, for one thing. Because I mean, that's a behavior that you want to reward and reinforce in people, not only to give me gifts, but to give other people gifts too. I think that's one of the things that really draws people more together. But it may have had something to do with, I always had money. I got a shiny Franklin half dollar for helping this kid deliver his papers when I was 5 years old. He'd give them to me. I'd run up, the walk and put them in the door. And then at the end of the week, he'd give me a shiny Franklin half dollar. It was back in the 1950s.
On that note, Bill, what you made me think about is, the gifting and the receiving.
Right?
So that, but is the gifting of a compliment
Yeah.
and the receiving of a compliment. Now, I'm not good at receiving compliments, and I'm working on that. And so, but it's very interesting how you can be in a situation like that and almost feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
And it's just so interesting as I have to learn to step back and just thank someone if they give me a compliment. But getting beyond that, whatever that feeling is, that and why that is. And I love that you said that, because I think that it's so interesting for us to look at things like that about ourselves and say, okay, well, what about this makes me feel off or uncomfortable, that I don't like receiving a compliment, or I don't like receiving a gift, or whatever it is.
Is it a little bit like what you said earlier about when somebody says I love you, and the suspicious nature that seems to just pop up? Like, well, what do you really mean by that? Or
No, no, not at all. It's
no?
just not for me about receiving a compliment, but there is, like I said, it's a training and just kind of for me now, and I'm getting better at it, but it used to be almost like I would just let it pass by without acknowledging it all.
Yep.
And then now it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that and thank whoever gave me a compliment.
Yeah, because you rob the giver of the joy,
Right, that's right, exactly.
because we all are such great givers. We know what we get from doing it, and so we have to reciprocate that to people that want to give us those things. I mean, I love getting presents.
Oh, I'm not talking about presents. I'm talking
Oh,
about
no, I know, and compliments do take some time to get used to, especially, I think, our generation, we're just they weren't forthcoming all the time, so it wasn't something I was used to growing up. I've gotten much better at it now with my, group of friends that we constantly are doing that with each other.
So you know what I think about that is that we are trained, and those 80,000 messages that we hear in our head all day long, which are mostly not complimentary, are the ones that we listen to, and we empower those thoughts.
Mhm.
And when somebody offers you a genuine, bit of feedback, like, Jan, you really are a sweet, empathetic gal, and I'm really glad that I get to spend time with you. And if that's not like, lined up with what you have been listening to recently on your own radio station, it might be a little awkward. It might create just a little bit of a little bit of awkwardness.
Hmm. I agree with you. I think that a lot of times, those the self talk
Mhm.
is very loud and very and tends not to be positive a lot of the time,
Yes.
depending on. And then all of a sudden you get a compliment or someone says something and you're taken, like, it's almost like you're taken aback. And every now and then, the same thing can happen if you like self compliment yourself. It's like when you say something and it's really wise, and you're like, did I just say that? With this sort of shock in your voice, like in your thoughts. Did that really come out of my mouth?
Good for you. There's nothing better than realizing something about yourself that works.
Hmm.
That's the one of the exercise or homework for our philosophy class was to think of a situation in your life and then sit back and say, what would a wise person say about that? And it's kind of interesting when you sit back and it's internally coming from you, but if you and we all have it, but to take the time to actually listen for that wise person that can compliment you and and it's true, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've done a few things lately where I'm doing this mentoring program, and we had to ask 5 people different qualities about ourselves, and if they were to speak about us. what they would, if they were to give us a compliment or talk about our positive attributes, what would they say to us? And it was very interesting hearing it from other people. And I'm actually collaborating on a book right now. And so what we decided to do is we're interviewing each other for our bios because we were all going to write our own bios. And then we said, well, it would be much better if there's four of us all together, is if we talk to each other and asked each other questions and then wrote down, let's say I interview Bill and I write down what my feelings about Bill and what I think about Bill and then combine that and have that be our bios.
Yeah.
I once did it was a dual painting. So it was an artist I knew was holding this event. So my niece was on one side of the canvas and I was on the other. And she wanted us to start with saying positive affirmations. I wasn't really sure my niece knew what that was. So I said, I like to go with like, I am, but she misunderstood me and thought I meant to talk about me. So she
Oh,
started writing fun loving aunt, really cool and all this other stuff. I switched it around and started writing things about her. So it was really, I mean, it was so much better than what I initially thought. And then, we paint over them, but they're always there, and we took pictures along the way. But it was interesting to have that
Yeah.
switch around and to hear what other people really think about you on the spot like that.
that's right. And it was very interesting getting that feedback from people because
Hmm.
how often we don't see ourselves the way other people think of us.
Mhm. You're talking about wisdom a lot today. Um, I'm not entirely sure that there is any wisdom. Uh, and that being the case, I always default back to a definition of wisdom that I heard Dean Martin say. And I know I've probably said this before, but you know what wisdom is, right? It's the result of good judgment. And you know what good judgment is the result of? Experience. And do you know what experience is the result of? Bad judgment. So you
That's
got to be willing to make the mistakes and then take the lesson, you know?
mhm.
But it's really nice to be around people that speak in such a way that they awaken the genius inside of you, you know? And speaking to people in such a way that there's a challenge for them to come out and play fully, you know? That later on when something happens, we call those like time released lessons, right? You didn't get it while we're in the conversation, but later on there's this recognition of, yes, that's exactly what we were talking about. And then there's that opportunity to go back and talk about the experience of living it and having it happen for you firsthand and not just hearing the story. And I feel like the more opportunity you get to spend with wise people, the more you get to put yourself into those places of bad judgment where you get experience.
Mm.
And sometimes that's just a feeling of discomfort. It's not necessarily that there's a bad outcome. I mean, a lot of people just won't do things that they predict are going to not make them feel great, right?
Yes,
Yes.
constantly.
Therefore, growth is pretty slow. And as that other saying goes, ignorance is bliss, and I refuse to be made unhappy. So, anyhow, what have we done here? Have we added anything to the body of knowledge of the exquisite journey that our life is?
Of course, at least another perspective, like we were saying. If you could hear the same thing, but if the right person says it in the right structure of sentence and the right using the right words, you suddenly hear it.
Yeah.
And if any of that hits home with anybody that's listening, I mean that's gold right there. So that's the most we can hope for.
and
And yes,
and then just making conscious choices about how you say what you say and how you say it.
And if you say it,
And if you say it at all,
right.
exactly. If you say it at all, and having that be a measure, and that could be directed at yourself too, is like I mentioned self-talk, like, how am I saying it? What am I saying? And is it relevant or advantageous to me at this point to be saying whatever I'm saying to myself? Because if you're overly critical of yourself, sometimes it's not fruitful in any way. And so
It's also not true.
it's also not true, exactly.
Yeah.
So using those same guidelines when you're talking to yourself.
Or do the homework and say, what would a wise person say in here?
Exactly.
Well, every time you hear those sentences that start out with "I always," "I never," whatever it is at the end of the sentence, it's not good things, right? It's not necessarily your most enlightened thinking, if you will. But you just have to like learn to, I always do such and so, and then follow that up with a sentence that says, well, you know, I will if I do. I might not. There's always that, that possibility. How people always no good deed goes unpunished, right? Well, it's true if it does, but that's not a way to live your life, expecting the worst in things. And that's where you start to do the what Jan's saying and take some responsibility for your thinking. Because that's not thinking, that's having thoughts, which is a different thing entirely. And we put it sometimes a little bit too much emphasis and stock into our thoughts. And if they're not challenging you to be the best you possibly can, and as Ken would say, always have the best day ever, you might want to rearrange, those thoughts into a different order, or challenge them a little bit and ask, is that true? Right? Is it necessary? Is it kind? I don't know about you. When I am particularly down on myself and I have a thought, I used to ask, well, where did you come from? You know? But what I kind of trained myself to do was say, look, I know you're there, Nancy Negative, and I have a good feeling that if I just ask you to go be quiet in the corner for a little while, you'll be right back there tomorrow to remind me again. So I'm busy today, but how about you and I have a little date tomorrow? And then that thought just kind of like goes away for a little while.
What I've been doing for, let's say, not positive feelings, whatever that might be, could be anger or fear or whatever those feelings are. I'll sit there and say to myself, it just shows that I'm alive. And, and it decreases their power a little bit just
Yeah.
for a second or two. And then I concentrate on my breathing. So that's like my shift now is like, just shows me, just like when I have some sort of pain in my body.
Yep.
Well, it's telling me I have a body.
Mm.
That's what it's telling me. I have a body. And for some reason or another, there's something going on, or there's something that's uncomfortable right now, but I have a body. And so it's just reframes that whole element of whatever it is for me.
I love that. I really do. You take the emphasis and the urgency and the power away from the thought, because it had no power until you had the reaction, right?
Hmm.
So why not give yourself a shot at having a second reaction differently?
Right. And sometimes it's not immediate, but it can take a little while to transition out of that, whatever it is. But that it doesn't take long. And there is that point where, of like you said, the pause. And so you're not, what we might say, you're not reacting to it. And you're also not feeding it. So most of the time with thoughts, the more you feed it and the more attention you pay to it, the more opportunity, or the more it comes in and the more opportunity do you have to live it.
Absolutely. So we are pretty much at the end of our hour. And any final thoughts to sort of wrap up?
The only thing I can make love, not war. Why that
Yeah,
came to mind.
100%.
I'd say go out and have a conversation with someone, especially somebody that you know well. Maybe practice some of these tools, like practice giving compliments, practice telling the other person what you like about them or what you love about them, and being willing to hear it in return.
I like that a lot. I also like the idea that if you're having uncomplimentary thoughts, call one of your closest friends and check in with them. And don't ask them to soothe you. Just ask them to respond and react to what you're thinking to yourself. Well, thank you very much. Two of my favorite people. I appreciate spending another hour with you. I think we've had some good times here today, lighting the candle, a world that works. And to you at home, always remember that everything that isn't action is a conversation. And every conversation can be either resolved or enhanced by another conversation. So when you're called to take action by a conversation, make sure you understand what the indicated action is and make sure you choose the results and the outcomes that can come from that action. In the meantime, I love you all. I really do. And I mean that with all 260 pounds of me. Bye-bye for now.
Have a good week.
Have a great one, everyone.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.